everyone. So today we're continuing with rational exponents. What we were doing yesterday was technically rational exponents. We're just adding a couple of steps on to what we did yesterday. I know that sounds like a lot of fun. So the big key here today is we're going to be looking at fractions now that have something other than 1 up on the top. Okay, yesterday if you look back at all the problems we did, they were all like 1/6, 1/3, 1/5, things like that. And so what this really focuses on is, can you take this fraction apart into multiple pieces? So for example, 3/2 is really like saying 1/2 and then just multiplying by 3, okay? And I know it seems silly to write it that way. This is really going to help you, and I'll show you how in just a second. So when you look at like 25 to the power of 3/2, you can rewrite this as 25 to the 1/2, and then that whole thing raised to the power of 3. Okay, because remember, when you're doing a power to a power, you really multiply to put those back together. So this right here is equivalent to that 3/2 that you had a second ago. And I know it seems like an extra step to like write it this way, but what you're really doing is giving yourself step-by-step directions. Okay, first I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. Okay, so for example, 25 to the 1/2, what we talked about yesterday, would be 5, right, if you split that into 2 equal factors. And then you still have this power of 3, so then 5 to the 3rd power is 125. Okay, so this is telling you to split, and this is telling you to raise to a power, and then that would be your final answer there. Okay, so let me show you how to do these next few. And again, your calculator does do these for you, but we need to focus on how to do them without a calculator because that is coming up later this week. However, I will say this first one, that number's a lot bigger than what I would normally ask you to do without a calculator. But the first step I would always take, no matter what, is writing this as 2401 to the 1/4 power, and then raising that to the power of 3. Okay? Okay, so what I need to do is I need to split this 2401 into 4 different factors, and that's kind of a weird one. 2 doesn't go into it, 3 doesn't go into it, 5, I think off the top of my head, I believe 7 works. Let's try it. 7, yep. So that's 7, which doesn't break down any further, and 343. 343, I know 7 goes into that. 7 and 49, and then 7 and 7. So I can safely say, because this broke into 1, 2, 3, 4 sevens, that 2401 to the 1/4 is equal to 7. Okay, and then I'm doing 7 to the 3rd power, which should be 343, but just to show you kind of how I come up with that. Yep, 7 to the 3rd power is 343. Okay, so that's how you tackle one of these. And again, if you take the time to write it out this way, you're really setting yourself up to do, first this step, then this step. Okay, so now I did this factor tree because I assumed that none of you knew off the top of your head that 7 to the 4th power was equal to 2401. Okay, but like on this next one, and I'm going to take this next one and I don't know, do it over here, I think. 64 to the 5/3 would be 64 to the 1/3, and then to the power of 5. I am hoping you know the answer to this off the top of your head. Now, we could do a factor tree for this. It's going to break down into a lot of 2's, and then we'd have to group all the 2's together. But remember, what you're really asking yourself here is, what to the 3rd power makes 64? And the better you get at these kinds of questions, the quicker this is going to go for you. Okay, answer to this one is 4. 4 to the 3rd power is 64. So then I'm going to do 4 to the 5th power, and that's probably, again, one that's a little higher than I could make you do without a calculator, because I don't even know it. 1024, and there's our final answer on that one. Okay? Okay, so then on this next one, this is like a 2-for-1 problem here. Remember, when you've got a fraction being raised to a power, you're doing this and this to that power of 2/3. So I'm going to do 27 to the 1/3 with a square on the outside. And then I'm going to do 125 to the 1/3 with a square on the outside. Again, that's me splitting up the 2/3 into a 1/3 and a 2. Okay? And I always do the fraction part first because it's easier to make the number smaller and then raise it to a power. Technically, you could get away with doing 27 squared and then doing that to the 1/3, but then you're making the number bigger before you make it smaller, and it's just easier this way. Okay, I hope these are both ones that you can do off the top of your head. 27 to the 1/3, so what to the 3rd power is 27? That'd be 3, and that's still being squared. 125 to the 1/3, so what to the 3rd power is 125? That'd be 5, and I'm squaring it. Okay, and so then 3 squared is 9, 5 squared is 25. I do want to look out to make sure that this doesn't reduce any further. Typically it won't. If this could be reduced, then this could have been reduced back here. Okay, so if you look at this and this can't reduce any further, you're not going to get it to reduce once you do all those powers and stuff. Okay, so that's the basics. That's the basics of taking a fraction, splitting it up. It's really just adding this step to what we did yesterday. Okay, but now in example 2, I'm going to add one more step with negatives. Okay, that's what I'm going to throw in here with those fractions. All right, this is just putting all the fun in one place. So I'm going to kind of start the same way. On this one, I'm going to go 7,776 to the 1/5, and then to the power of 2. Okay, and what am I missing? I haven't done a negative sign yet. So now I'm going to do this whole thing to the power of -1. I know that this looks crazy to write it out in 3 steps like this, okay? But I promise you, you will thank me later. This is just walking you through step by step by step, okay? This is a bigger number, again, than I would ask you to do by hand. All right, technically we could, again, make a factor tree. I'm going to cheat just a little bit here. We're still working through these steps by hand, but 7,776 to the power of 1/5, should be 6, but yep. So then this is saying to do 6 squared, and then that to the power of -1. Okay, so I took care of this. Well, 6 squared is 36, and we've got that to the power of -1. And then ask yourself, what does a power of -1 really do? It takes it and flips it over and makes it a reciprocal, so then your answer would be 1/36. Okay? So by writing this little -1 out there and carrying it all the way through, it's just a reminder for you that at the end you need to flip your answer. Okay? Okay? All right, let's take a look at the next one. The next one I'm going to do something slightly different. Now, I always kind of go in this order, right? I do the fraction and then the whole number and then the negative at the end because then I just flip it at the end. All right? But think about this. What if I did 1/64? And what if I did the negative first? And then did the power of 1/2? And then did the power of 3? Does this all still go together to make -3/2? Hopefully you're saying yes. It does. It actually doesn't matter what order you put these in. This is typically the order that it's the easiest. We already talked about how the fraction makes the number smaller, this makes the number bigger, and then this is what flips and makes it be a fraction. Okay, so why would I put that negative first? Well, if you look at this one, if I flip it first, then this becomes just a 64. It becomes not a fraction anymore. So there are some cases where it's easier to flip it ahead of time, or where it's easier to do these steps in a different order, okay? Now, if you chose not to do that, that's okay. You would just have a fraction all the way through, and then it would flip at the end. But when I notice things like that, sometimes I like to do these in a different order. So applying the -1 to this first, that's going to flip it and make it 64/1, otherwise known as just 64. And then I have 64 to the 1/2, and then that's to the power of 3. All right, 64 to the 1/2, that's really like the square root of 64, so that's 8. And again, I've left myself with one that's kind of too big here, so 8 to the power of 3, comes out to be 512. And so if you had done these in the other order, you would have ended up with 1 over 512, and then the negative 1 would have flipped it anyway. So it doesn't matter, but I thought it would be easier to get rid of the fraction as early as I can. Okay, I think I will start a second video for the next 2 examples. So this video really just focuses on how to work with the actual numbers. You are going to have to do these without a calculator, but the ones that I ask you to do without a calculator will be more along the lines of these. Okay, the 64 one would be fair game, but these ones with the 7,776 or the 8 to the third, those are bigger than what you would have to do with a calculator. So we'll be practicing throughout the week which ones would you have to do without a calculator, which ones, could you use it for. But really the idea of these stair steps is the important piece to take away here. Okay, whether you're using a calculator or not, knowing what all is packed into that exponent is the most critical thing. Okay? Okay, stay tuned for the second video.